Careblazer, chances are, if you are caring for a loved one with dementia, you will at some point find yourself having to advocate for your loved one, whether it's trying to get them the services you think they need, helping with discharge planning, making sure staff is following through on their care plan. There's so much that goes into caring for your loved one with dementia and making sure the other healthcare providers and systems are also caring for your loved one with dementia. Today is such a special treat. I have to say, this is probably the most interesting, informative, and quite frankly, one of my most favorite interviews I have ever done. I'm interviewing an elder law attorney who has a practice that does something I have never heard of another practice doing. And luckily for you, he's sharing step by step what they do and how family members can do this, even if you don't belong to his firm. This is so helpful. He kept sharing so many links and websites. I'm putting them all for you below so that you can access them. Whatever you do, please set aside the time to watch this full video in its entirety. And we are definitely going to have him back on the channel because he was such a wealth of knowledge. So if you have any follow-up questions you want to hear his viewpoint on, leave them in the comments below so that when we bring him back on, we might pull from the comment section to get some of his answers. Let's dive into this amazing interview with this amazing attorney, Bob Mannor.
So I'm Bob Mannor. I'm a certified elder law attorney in Michigan.
Careblazers, I'm so excited to introduce you to Bob Mannor. Bob, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us.
Well, I appreciate you having me on your excellent podcast. I'm excited about this.
Me too. So take a moment and give us a brief introduction about yourself and what you do.
Sure. I'm Bob Mannor. I'm a certified elder law attorney in Michigan, and we have something that's a bit unique. We call it a dementia-focused practice. We found out that a lot of the folks that we help have some form of dementia, and so that for the last few years, we have been marketing ourselves that way because we realized we have a special affection, but also a special way of making sure that we're dealing with the legal issues associated with dementia.
So can you explain, what are the different things you would be doing in your practice to help families and people with dementia?
Well, sure. So some of it is the legal technical. That's definitely a part of it, the financial, the legal. And that is important because I'll tell you, when I was in law school, there was no such thing as elder law. If it was, I had never heard of it. They didn't teach it. It was not one of the optional classes. They're starting to now offer this as an elective class in most law schools. It's not been something that's been around. So most lawyers, if they have any education in dealing with some of the unique issues of dementia or long-term care, it's very limited. And so there are some unique legal issues that we really probably should be setting things up differently if one spouse or if the surviving, a single person has any form of dementia or diagnosis, or we're strongly worried about that. But in addition to that legal, financial, and how there are very distinct differences from your standard estate planning, that we have something we call care navigation. And care navigation is we unite the legal and the financial and the advocacy, because what we found was people will often come to us with the idea that they're concerned about how are we going to pay for care, but that's only one out of many concerns about how are we going to make sure that mom lives the rest of her life with dignity, that we're getting the best care that we can, that we know all of our options, that we're not getting pushed around the healthcare system. And so we have care advocates in our office. We used to have an RN, now we have a couple of social workers, but the idea is that we're trying to merge that legal, financial, and the advocacy to try to get the best results that we can for our families.
I love that. I think that truly sets you apart. I've never heard of a practice focusing on something like this so clearly. And I think most of the time when people think about elder law, they think about that financial piece, that future planning piece. Maybe they might think about getting elder law attorneys involved if there's some sort of allegation of abuse or something has already happened. But this idea of advocacy, that's beautiful. Can you explain a situation where, people might not typically associate with an elder law practice where they're relying on you for advocacy, or what your team would do to help a family member?
Well, I'll give you two quick examples. One is when the family's facing this crisis, they've never typically faced this before. So they're now faced with something that they didn't expect a week ago. It often starts with some kind of crisis like a fall, or mom was wandering, or there's some issue that created that crisis. There's a hospital stay. I'm not being disparaging. This is just a fact of life that the hospital tends to try to rush you out of the hospital. Hopefully we'll get some form of rehab that we don't just go right back home, which happens, I think, a little too often, but we get an option for rehab for physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and that would be in a skilled nursing facility or a nursing home. And so the family really has to now very quickly make a lot of decisions. And in that situation, it's really difficult to do without having the breadth of knowledge of all the options are out there. We do a lot of work with social workers and discharge planners. We actually had our big training just last Friday. And what we heard from them is they would love to spend hours with the family, helping them explain the options, helping them explain what resources are out there, whether the home care is realistic, whether we can look at independent living or some form of assisted living or nursing home care. And the answer that they tell us is, well, we'd love to do that. That's what we hoped we would be doing when we took this job. We simply do not have the time with the paperwork, with the state requirements, all of that. And so that's where we can come in and kind of help them explore their options and figure out what resources fit with what living situation, what options there are, and frankly, making sure that they're actually getting sufficient care. Because I think when we rush through that, the tendency is, okay, well, we're just going to take mom home. Okay, well, what resources do we have at home to make sure that the issue's not going to happen again? Well, daughter's going to fly in from another state and stay there for a few days. Okay, that's great. Will help us. But what about a week from now? What about 6 months from now? And so we try to help with all of that. The other quick example is something that we just dealt with recently. And that was where someone had gone to the hospital in a crisis, had gone to rehab, and this rehab is licensed as a licensed nursing home. Well, in my state, if you're licensed as a licensed nursing home and you accept Medicare, you also have to accept other forms of government benefits like Medicaid. Well, they get a slightly less reimbursement rate for Medicaid than they do for Medicare. And they were doing everything they could to kick this person out of their nursing home. Well, we had to advocate to say, okay, there are regulations that we have to follow. And if we decide that that's the appropriate place to stay, and it happened to be a very nice, facility, you can't kick us out. And so we scrambled. We were able to quickly get the corporate office involved. We finally got their lawyers involved, and their lawyers said, yeah, they're right. You can't kick somebody out because they switch payment source. And that's the type of advocacy that we provide.
Yeah, that's amazing, because those kinds of topics can be so overwhelming, so confusing, and it can feel like you're at a loss when you as the family member are trying to navigate that whole thing. So to have a team of people on your side who know the law inside and out and who can do a lot of this advocating on your behalf is amazing. I'm thinking back to when my dad got transferred to a skilled nursing facility, and I don't know what happened in the transfer process, lack of information being discussed, but it was almost 2 weeks before any sort of therapy set eyes on him, PT, OT, anything like that. And I kept saying, like, and those days are counting against how many days he has there. I'm like, he's here to get therapy. What's the deal? And they're like, well, we don't have any orders for therapy. I'm like, okay. So then I'm calling the hospital that discharged him. Well, we sent the orders for therapy. And I felt like I all of a sudden had another part-time job, just trying to get the two facilities to talk to one another and figure out who's missing what and why can't my dad get the therapy right now that he needs. Is that a situation that your group would actually be able to advocate?
Absolutely. And that's the point, is that this area and you knew what was supposed to be right. Imagine a family that doesn't know what options they have. That's why your dad was there. That they probably wouldn't have transferred him there if it wasn't for the therapy order. And so for them to use that excuse just doesn't make any sense. But this type of thing happens all the time. One of the things from the transfers where we transfer from home to the hospital to nursing home, often the orders get mixed up all the time, where now we were on a set schedule schedule of medicines at home and they go to the hospital, and sometimes those are going to change because of the nature of the hospital. But a lot of times that's a temporary situation. And then how they gets passed on to the nursing home. Well, nobody ever intended, there wasn't a doctor that sat down and said, hey, this person, dad should take these medicines for the rest of his life. It was just for the, 3 days that they're in the hospital, we're going to give them some medicine to calm them down, something like that. Next thing you know, they're on that medicine for the rest of their life because nobody thought to stop it. And then they go to the nursing home doctor might have a new set of prescriptions. Those might have been intended to be temporary too, to deal with a particular symptom that was happening or whatever. All of a sudden you have all these drugs that are coming in because no one's really taking a look at that. And I'm not blaming the doctors or the facilities. I'm saying that's the nature of communication between the entities, is things go through and it's not always communicated. You almost need that person that can look at everything, step back, kind of look at the big picture, and the family can do that. But a lot of times the family doesn't know what questions they're allowed to ask. They don't know what they're allowed to make polite demands for. And so this has been a really great option for us. I will tell you about where you can find lawyers like us throughout the country in a minute. There's a couple of organizations, but it has been something that we find that the families really aren't able to know what they're allowed to ask for, or even, to challenge the medical process or whether or not therapy should start, things like that. And so having that backup is very helpful.
Yeah. And I just remember personally feeling really concerned that as I was advocating to get the therapy, that somehow it was going to be taken out on my dad. Like I felt, even though I was very respectful and polite, but I was very persistent and advocating. And it just felt like maybe I felt like I was becoming a problem person, and they would see me walk in and be like, oh no, and I could see having people on my team to help guide me and help step in some of these things would have been so helpful than me constantly being the same one and feeling like I really had no power.
That's an excellent point. And that I've experienced that too as the lawyer. Before we really got into the care navigation things, these issues still came up, and I still tried to advocate for my clients. But I can tell you the worst thing that anybody in the healthcare field wants to hear is, hey, there's a lawyer on the phone for you, or there's a lawyer in your office. Now, I always say, well, I'm not that type of lawyer. I'm not the type of lawyer that you need to be concerned about. I don't sue people. We're not here to sue people. That's not what we do. But there is that nervousness. Plus, my personality is such that I tend to move my arms around and I tend to speak kind of loudly. And so it's not really conducive to that conversation. We want it to be cooperative. We do not want it to be adversarial when we have those questions. And so that's why we've instituted this care navigation, where I intentionally am looking for people that have a more diplomatic or gentler personality, but also people that can speak the language. When they say, hey, there's a social worker on the phone to talk to you, a social worker on behalf of the family, it's much more receptive. We make sure our care navigators really try to take a very cooperative tone with everything. And of course, I try to do that too, but there's certain lawyers are known for being argumentative, I guess, is the way. And so there's that sort of that expectation. But if we can set up those social workers so that their goal is to be cooperative and be helpful. I mean, the facility wants to provide the physical therapy. They want to provide the occupational therapy. We just have to make sure that the system's working properly. So they're not opposed to the things that we're doing. It's just that they get nervous if they think it's going to be adversarial.
Yes.
And so that's one of the things that I think exactly answers that, that point.
So I want to talk about this. So you are based out of Michigan.
Yes.
Does that mean you can only help people in Michigan?
For the most part, because I'm licensed in Michigan, we occasionally will try to direct people to the right resources in other states. But as far as a client, having a client relationship, it has to be Michigan.
Good, because I'm just imagining people right now listening are like, I need this in my life, and I don't want everybody contacting you right away. If you're in Michigan, I'll make sure to link all of Bob's practice below, and you can contact him that way. But if you're not in Michigan, let's hear what Bob has to say.
So this is a small group of lawyers throughout the country. There's no denying that this is a niche or a minority group of lawyers that do this. But the organization that was sort of known for innovating this is an organization called the Life Care Law Firm Association, something like that. And it is, I looked recently, there's only about 100 different law firms that are part of that organization. Now, if they're part of the Life Care Law Firm Association, they almost certainly have some form of care planning or care navigation, or at least they're working towards that, so that they're looking at this as more of a holistic process, not just about the dollars and the legal documents, because that's the nature, that's the whole push behind that. I was at their conference just a few months ago, and one of the things that was brought up by some of the new people that had just joined the organization, they said, well, there's somebody else in my town that already does this type of planning. And the leaders of the organization were saying, well, that's good. We want more people out there. We want to get the word out that this is an option. This is a thing that can be done. And so it tends to be where we actually want more competition so that more people can understand that there is this option.
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to link below in the description. It looks like it might be, tell me if this sounds right, Life Care Planning Law Firms Association.
Thank you. I knew I was leaving out a word.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great organization that's been around for a long time, started by Tim Takix out of Tennessee. There's another organization that is run by Julie Steinbacher, and Julie is a fascinating person. She's out of Pennsylvania. She started out working in nursing homes. Before she went to law school, she was working in nursing homes. She has a gerontology degree, undergrad degree. Her father was a lawyer, and so she started working in her father's office. When she started her practice, it was just sort of a natural blend. And now she has an organization that she helps other lawyers with this type of thing. She calls her organization the Dementia Focused Practice.
Okay.
And so there's folks that are in both of these organizations. There's folks that are in one or the other, but those are the two organizations I'm aware of lawyers that participate in this type of thing.
Okay, thank you. That's super helpful. And Careblazers, I will link to Bob Mannor's practice as well as those other two websites and people you just mentioned. So those will be in the description below. I would like to get into like some nitty gritty for family members who are maybe they don't have access to this type of advocacy right now, but they're facing some challenging situations. I want to talk about how they can advocate, what they can do, what's within their rights. And I want to start with a common question I get, which is, can family members put cameras in their loved one's room? This is something many family members are concerned about, worried about. We've seen horror stories on the news about what has happened to some people. We know that's the minority of cases, but it can bring a sense of calm to family members, whether it's in a care facility or even in their loved one's home, and maybe they have professional caregivers coming in. Are there laws against cameras in these places?
So this is an excellent question. It's something, so I was recently chair of my state section of the bar, the Elder Law and Disability Rights section of the bar. And this is something we debated, and we hired a lobbyist, and we were trying to push through in Michigan. It's a bit of a controversial issue. And so the answer I'm going to give you is the lawyer's answer, because I might have my own answer if it was my parents, but I have to give you the lawyer's answer. And the lawyer's answer is you've got to check on your state law and what the requirements are. So the big question is it one-party consent or is it two-party consent? Does everybody that might be captured by that recording device have to consent to it? My organization that lobbied for this, our position was, as long as we knew, Michigan had been a one-party consent law, meaning that you could already do this. Now, some of the facilities were saying, no, you can't do that. You have to follow our rules. We tried to make sure that there was a friendly politician, a state representative that tried to push this through to make sure that we got clarity that you can do this, that you can put cameras in the room. A little bit different story if it's at home, but we still want to check state law if it's one-party consent or two-party consent, because if the caregivers don't know there's a camera, that could be an issue. And so what it came down to, as soon as we started trying to pass a law, the industry kind of came in and they said, okay, sure, we'll be behind this law, but let's put on all these amendments. And the amendments were okay. They put so many amendments that it made it very difficult to comply that we actually withdrew our support for the law, because they wanted to make sure that there were signs posted, that they had people signing waivers, that they made it so difficult for it to be allowed that it would be difficult for any family to follow those restrictions. We ended up withdrawing our support for that bill because we thought it made it worse than the current situation. So every state's going to have a different rule on this. And to be careful, if you want to make sure that you stay on the right side of the regulations, then you want to check out state law. There's a separate question though, and I think this is important to address, is what if you had that camera and what if you have footage of something bad happening? Is that going to be admissible in court? okay? Because sometimes we want to pursue this. Something very bad happened and you want to pursue it in court. And that's another issue. If the recording didn't follow all the exact regulations of the state as with recording, a lot of times courts will still admit that information or that evidence, even if you didn't follow all the letter of the law with regard to how you got that recording. Now, I'm not saying it will be admitted, but I'm saying that those are two separate issues, whether you can record and whether if you did record, it would be admissible in court.
Okay, that's super helpful. And I'm just thinking, me personally, hearing what you said, like, I know it's not the legal answer, but hearing what you said, even if it's not technically allowed, it probably would be admissible in court if it was something bad was there. Like, that would make me want to lean to, if I had concerns, getting footage.
Yeah. So that's where I started off by saying, I got to tell you the legal answer, which is you should check your state law. I also can't guarantee that it would be admissible in court, but I know most states have a more open policy towards evidence of wrongdoing in a court of law than they would about regulatory requirements about whether you've met all the specific requirements of recording. In every state, you can pretty much Google your state and say, is this for recording devices, this is a one-party consent state or is it a two-party consent state? And so you can find evidence that your state is a one-party consent state, you probably can do it. And now the administration may try to stop it, but that doesn't mean that it's illegal or anything like that. They might just say, well, this is private property and things like that. But if you're a one-party consent state, you have a much better standing to try to insist that you get the camera there.
Okay, thank you. That was another follow-up question, was how would a family member even find out the state law? So I love that. Googling, is this a one, party consent state or two? And there's so many different laws, when it comes to care. Is there a certain resource or a place that family members could go to figure out what is legal? Or is it truly just taking to Google and trying to answer the question and letting it lead you to whatever law exists?
Yeah, that's tough. So if you have a very, very specific question and you can stay in the state of Michigan, is the state of Michigan a one-party consent state for recording devices? That's a pretty good Google inquiry. If you can't get that specific and you already know what terminology would be used by the law, I wouldn't necessarily trust the Google answer. And here's why. When it comes to this area of law, every state's going to be different. Even when it comes to federal benefits like Medicaid or Medicare, sometimes even to the extent of veterans benefits to some extent, every state's going to be a little bit different. And so when you Google it, you might get information that would be accurate to the person that put it online, but might not be accurate to your locality. So you have to be careful about that unless you know the very, very specific legal question that you're asking. I think you can probably rely on it if you ask a very detailed legal question, but beyond that, it's difficult to get general information. I will give you a couple resources that you might be able to get some basic legal requirements of a little bit more nuanced that might be state by state. There's a website, a group called Elder Law Answers. So they have on Elder Law Answers, I've actually not interacted with them in the last few years, but I'm impressed by their website. It is lawyers that put it together, and they have some resources on there that tell you things by state, which state authorizes family care contracts, what would be the penalty, divisor penalty for gifting in each state. And so that's one of the better resources, I think, for accessing state by state, very detailed regulations about state law.
Okay, super helpful. Thank you for that. One last follow-up question on the cameras. Which I imagine probably the majority of care facilities say no cameras or private cameras. If they discovered that the family member did have a camera in the room, could that potentially lead to them getting discharged or their loved one getting kicked out?
I can't say for sure. I would say in Michigan, I would be confident they could not kick us out for that. Now, again, every state's going to be a little bit different. Every state's going to have different enforcement of the rules. I can often say, hey, the rule says this, but I know in Michigan, there's certain rules that they don't really enforce the same way that I would read that rule, say, for example. I can say in Michigan with confidence that someone came to me saying, my mom's getting discharged because we had a camera in there. I'm confident that I could probably stop that discharge. That's probably true. That's the way the law should be in every state. But again, the enforcement mechanism, they're licensing people, the people that license the facility, they may be more stringent in some states and less stringent in other states. So I could imagine where you could be in a state that you go to the ombudsman, the long-term care ombudsman or something like that, and they say, well, there's nothing we can do for you. You're getting kicked out. That is not true in Michigan. Every state would have this process called involuntary involuntary discharge, where you have to go through a administrative procedure to discharge them. Well, you can appeal that discharge, and that would be something that we would regularly do. If somebody's trying to do discharge involuntarily, we appeal it. And then in Michigan, there's some pretty strong regulations that say, okay, you got to follow all these steps to involuntarily discharge somebody. I've never lost one of those involuntary discharge appeals because there is a lot of regulations for licensed facilities in Michigan that may be different in other states, and their enforcement mechanism might be different in other states.
Okay, so this is interesting. So the involuntary discharge, I have Careblazers talk to me all the time about they're trying to kick my mom out or all this stuff. And it feels like the family member's very powerless. But would you say that even if they didn't have a lawyer on their team at that moment, that family member could formally request an appeal? And that's what they would say?
So I got to clarify one thing. It depends on if they're licensed to accept Medicare or Medicaid. It doesn't matter if it's either or. If the facility's licensed to accept Medicare or Medicaid, then yes, any state in Michigan, they would have to go through this process of involuntary discharge. That's
Any state in the US?
Any state in the US,
Okay.
yeah. That's a federal regulation. If they're not licensed to receive Medicare or Medicaid benefits or payments, then there might not be such a discharge. So in Michigan, for example, a lot of the assisted livings and even memory cares and independent livings are not licensed at all, or they're licensed under an adult foster care type license. They look at that, the state of Michigan looks at that as just like a rental agreement, like a landlord-tenant agreement. And so they could be discharged without having to have an appeal. So it has to be a place that accepts Medicare or Medicaid before they can ask for an involuntary discharge.
And if it is a place that accepts Medicare or Medicaid and they're trying to do an involuntary discharge and the family says, I want to appeal, could the family also have access to the criteria that they would need to follow? The family member can ask for that. Like, I want to see the criteria that has to be met in order for you to involuntarily discharge my loved one.
Unfortunately, I doubt that that would be readily provided by the facility. There might be a long-term care, well, there should be a long-term care ombudsman that they can contact, and that would be your best friend in that situation because they will know the law. There's a pretty good chance that the facility or the administrator might not even know all the regulations they're supposed to follow because most families don't know how to advocate for themselves. They don't know that they can say, hey, this is an involuntary discharge. So they're so used to doing it a certain way where they just say, okay, your Medicare days are up, so you're leaving tomorrow. They're so used to that happening and families not knowing that they have rights that the administrators just kind of get used to it, and they don't often know. Again, I'm not being critical. I'm just saying this is the reality that they're so used to it happening a certain way. They just think that that's the law. And so your ombudsman is the one, your long-term care ombudsman is the one that should know the rules and regulations and can help you get access to that information.
And every facility should have an ombudsman there to help family members if they have Medicare or Medicaid, if they take Medicare or Medicaid.
So the ombudsman is actually a very interesting thing. It's almost a not quite government process. In the state of Michigan, the long-term care ombudsman, they said, was housed in the state because there was not any place to house it. But in Michigan now, it's under a nonprofit organization that's an advocacy organization. And then the individual local ombudsmans work through the area agency on aging. So everybody in the United States, they should be covered by an area agency on aging. So the local ombudsman works through the area agency on aging. And then there's a sort of governing ombudsman that is in our state is under an advocacy organization. So they're not really a government employee. They're not tied to a specific place, but they usually have territories. I don't know if you know anything about the geography of Michigan, but there's the Upper Peninsula, which is the very rural area of Michigan, and it covers a lot of span of area. And we were talking to the ombudsman on Friday, and she said that one ombudsman covers that entire Upper Peninsula, which is about I'm going to say about a 7-hour drive from one end to the other end.
So in my experience in both of the facilities my mom was at and my dad was at, they always had posted the ombudsman's contact information. And so I imagine for most Careblazers, you could just look for that. But also if you don't see it, you can ask for the information that you could call because they're supposed to help the family member.
I would imagine that this is true in most states. I know in Michigan, if you call, there's an 800 number for the ombudsman. ombudsman, and it will redirect you to the local ombudsman. Their phone system sets it up that way. So if it knows you're calling from a specific area, it should redirect you to that. Also, again, I don't want to over encourage Google, because Google has a lot of bad information too. But if you Google specifically, who is the long-term care ombudsman, or what is the contact information for the long-term care ombudsman in Oregon or wherever you are, then you should be able to get that information.
Okay, wonderful. I think I'm going to develop a pretty amazing resource list after our conversation today. So I really appreciate all of this that I'll share with the Careblazers. This is a really great kind of segue to how can family members advocate? Like, where do they even start? Where do they even begin if they have concerns about their loved one's needs not being met, about how the staff is doing things? Like, do you have any tips for family members in this position? Even if it's in a care facility or maybe just the hospital setting.
Yes. So there's two levels of advocacy. And the first start is be nice, right? Be nice. I know sometimes it's hard because this is a crisis. There's a lot of emotions going on, but where you're trying to work together, you're trying to be cooperative, trying to be non-adversarial. So that's my first tip. The second thing is there's a difference in what you can do for advocacy if they are regulated or if they're unregulated. Now, in some states, everything is regulated, right? In some states, assisted living, adult foster cares, all of those are regulated. Other states like mine, we're really looking at the hospital. You have lots of rights. A licensed nursing home, you have lots of rights. And in assisted livings or independent livings, you have lesser rights. Your option is to leave and go elsewhere. So I'm more comfortable talking about the advocacy in places that are regulated. So are licensed, like the hospital. So every place has an administrative process. Most decisions or things that you think are adversarial can be appealed. But one of the things that's required in both the hospital and regulated licensed facilities is that they do regular care meetings. You're supposed to do a care meeting, certainly before discharge, but you can call for a care meeting at any time. I'm a strong believer in, if you are trying to advocate for something or fix some problem that's there, the best place to do that is in a formal care meeting. If you tell the nurse manager, if you tell the person that's coming into the room that there's a problem there, that may not get written down anywhere. So the formal process is this care meeting. In the care meetings, there should be all the relevant people. And if they're not the relevant people, you can say, okay, well, we can talk today, but this is not a complete care meeting. We need somebody from nursing. We need somebody from therapy. We need somebody from the business office. We need a social worker. We need all of them so that we can have this communication about the quality of care. We should also have, and you can demand, and this doesn't happen all the time, a written plan of care. And so this is how we address a lot of these issues where we say, okay, well, we hit the call button and people aren't coming for a very long time, or there's just not enough water and mom's dehydrated all the time, or there's some issue about any of the caregiving issues. So we ask for it to be in writing. We want it to be in writing in a plan of care that says this is this person's plan of care, and each patient should have a unique and customized plan of care. The next question is, how do we enforce that plan of care? And so in our case, and again, our clients have an advantage because they've got somebody that knows the law advocating for them, and we got our social workers. But then sometimes we'll put a log in the room and we say, okay, this is part of the plan of care. This is what you've agreed to. Let's make sure we log it every time that we, come in for this purpose. When we come in to help with the toileting, or we come in for a shower, if there's a question of showering, all right, well, this is supposed to be showered every day or every other day, whatever it is. Let's have a log. We want to be able to see it, have the log that the family can see it, because you've already consented to this plan of care. It's challenging to ask for these things, especially to ask for them without being angry or demanding, but those are things that are, I think, the most effective. Ask for a plan of care, ask for it in writing, and then try to enforce it by having a log of how often they're doing the things in the plan of care.
That's so helpful. Thank you. So Careblazers, I hope you caught that. Ask for a plan of care meeting. Now, my understanding is sometimes, especially if somebody's been there for a while, there are plan of care meetings at certain timelines, even before discharge they might be having. Is it customary for them to invite family members to that plan of care, or is it typical that the family member will have to ask, I want to know when the plan of care meetings are happening for my loved ones so I can attend?
There are definitely federal regulations, and I'm guessing most states would have similar regulations that say who needs to be included and notified. And so they can't force the family to come, obviously, but they should give them proper notice. They should make sure that if they they can't meet that time frame, that they offer them additional other options. Because in that plan of care, I've seen where, it's because it's a requirement, and anything where it's a requirement, sometimes people get a little bit sloppy on it. I've seen where they've done a plan of care where it was just, hey, we've got the social worker and the nurse manager and the business office and they're sitting together. So let's call this the plan of care, and we'll write it down and we'll document that we did a plan of care. That is absolutely not sufficient. They need to notify the patient has a right to be there. The family has a right to be there. Now, they could probably restrict it to who's the primary, point of access. What they can't do, and we've had a few places try to do this, but rarely, and then we usually get over it. They can't deny you anybody that you want there. So I don't go to those plan of care meetings because everybody get nervous if a lawyer walks in. But I do send my care navigators, and every once in a while they'll say, "Oh, you're from a law office, you can't be here." And we say, no, that patient and that patient's family has the right to have any advocate, anybody they want to be in that meeting has the right to be there. You can't be denied access to that plan of care just because you work for a law firm or because because you're not the primary advocate. Now, there is a question of who do they have to notify. It has to be at least the one primary person, of the family member that is the person supposed to be notified, and the patient themselves. But then if the family wants someone else there, other people there, they can't deny them access to that meeting.
Now, I just want to be clear. So for these plan of care meetings, which are required, is this just for a long-term care facility? Is it also for a skilled nursing facility? What about a long hospital stay?
I would argue, and again, every state's going to be doing it a little differently, but at a minimum, it should be anywhere where they accept Medicare. If they accept Medicare in a continuing care facility like a skilled nursing or nursing home, then this is a requirement because this is a Medicare requirement. And so hospital, we don't call it a plan of care necessarily in hospital, we call it a discharge meeting. That is another tip that I often will give my clients. I say, okay, sometimes they're so quickly to rush us out of the hospital, in our area at least, and I suspect all over the country, they tend to do it on Friday afternoons. And that's the worst time, right? So first of all, it's the worst time because your advocates, like your lawyers, aren't going to be available at 6 o'clock on Friday. Number two is you're not going to get any physical therapy or occupational therapy on the weekend. If you do find the transfer to the right place.
Right. And those days count against you. I was so upset with my dad. Though nothing on the weekend, yet those count against your days.
Exactly right. And so my tip, and it works, at least it has worked so far, is first we ask for a formal discharge meeting. And from under Medicare rules, you're allowed to demand a in-person or virtual, I guess, discharge meeting. They rarely have them. And they're supposed to, under Medicare rules, they're supposed to provide a detailed discharge plan. Now, this almost never happens, but you can demand it and you can ask for a discharge meeting. At that discharge meeting, if you can't get them to continue the stay until Monday, or at least give you a little more time to figure out what your options are, then the next answer is, especially if it's a Friday afternoon or a Saturday, you appeal the discharge through your QIO, Quality Improvement Organization. So every region has its own Quality Improvement Organization. They are required to give you the information, the phone number. The appeal through the Quality Improvement Organization is just a phone. As you call the phone before you're discharged, and then they have to respond. In my experience, hospitals, if they're trying to discharge you on Friday evening or Friday afternoon or on the weekend, they're not going to be able to document their response to the appeal until Monday. Now you just bought yourself time till Monday where you can get others involved. So far, it's worked every time where somebody's being discharged on a Friday. We say, well, first call for a discharge meeting. If that's not successful, at the discharge meeting saying, okay, I'm going to appeal. I'm going to do it right now. And then you call that phone number. Sometimes you might even go to voicemail, but it's the Quality Improvement Organization. It's a third-party organization that looks at the discharge to see if it's a proper discharge. But if nothing else, it usually gets us to Monday if we're on a weekend.
Now, in your experience, are facilities pretty consistent in alerting family members, here's the next plan of care meeting, or we're having a plan of care meeting?
No.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I didn't attend one for my mother or my father during that. Like, nobody told me anything. It was just a really chaotic thing. I could have done things so much better. But I'm like, not once, even when my dad was discharged to a group home, we didn't even have a discharge meeting. I'm talking to like the social worker and we're coordinating things. I'm obviously communicating with people, but never once was I in a room or even told about any meeting with all these people coming together. Yet when I worked in a long-term care facility, it was really great. We did care plan meetings weekly. We invited the resident in, we invited their family member in and whoever else they wanted. We all sat around. They were like an hour long. We did that and we followed that to a T, but my experience on the end as a family member, I've never had it happen that way.
And so the good news on that is you can demand a care meeting. And so even if they say, well, we had one yesterday, you say, well, I didn't know about it, I wasn't there, you can demand a care meeting. We've even demanded care meetings in care meetings where we said we were in the care meeting, we had our social worker, our care navigator in the care meeting, and we weren't getting the proper information. They didn't have it available for us, so we didn't have the right people to talk to. And we said, okay, well, unless you can get them now, we need another care meeting, and let's schedule it for a couple of days out or whatever. So you can demand a care meeting. And again, they have regulations of what they're supposed to follow. This is where if they refuse those types of things, that's where you call the ombudsman, and the ombudsman can advocate for you too.
Okay, I love this. This is so helpful. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. Just a few more questions. At what point is it best for a family member to bring in an elder law attorney or be talking to an elder law attorney?
So that's a great question. It's going to really depend on the attorney. So different attorneys have different perspectives on this. And you got to understand, a lot of elder law attorneys really do just focus on the legal financial. And they might be able to provide some advocacy or some advice on this, but not every lawyer is going to have, any lawyer, even that does Medicaid or does, the elder law, is going to know all of the ins and outs, like the Quality Improvement Organization or all the rules with regard to Medicare. But I'll tell you what our experience is and what we encourage. And we tell all this for our estate planning clients, everybody else, anybody that comes into our office. I even put it in their agreement that they sign with us. And the very last paragraph says, call us. And what it really says is, call us if anything bad happens. And what I encourage them to do is call us while they're still in the hospital. If the crisis happens, the fall happens, the stroke happens, whatever it is. And I'm telling this to perfectly healthy people, even younger people. I'm saying, okay, if something bad happens, call us while you're still in the hospital. I think that's the best place to start coming up with the plan of care. And because if you get too far along, you've already kind of gotten past, you've lost some of your rights potentially if you already left the hospital. You have the right to decide where you're going next. And so if they say, well, this is the place that we found, they have a bed available, we're going to send you over there, it might not be the place that you want to, or that's convenient for you, or you've heard bad things about it, or whatever it is. You have the right to say, no, find me a different place.
Yeah.
And that's where the discharge comes in. They're really not supposed to discharge you until they found an appropriate next step. They found the appropriate discharge to where. And so, so that's my advice on that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that makes your practice different, but one of the things that stands out to me is you're one of the few practices I'm familiar with that focuses proactively. Like many practices, it's like when something bad happens, meaning the neglect has already happened or the abuse has already happened or you haven't been able to get what you want, like that's when you call us. Versus you're saying, hey, maybe that hospital does everything perfectly and you might not really need us for much, but give us a call when the hospitalization happens, or,
Right.
just so we can follow and make sure you have all the right information. I love that. I think that's so helpful. And I have two follow-up questions that actually I want to go back to, and it has to do with, you mentioned when it comes to a regulated facility or non-regulated facility, like how you would advocate. How does a family member know what's regulated and what's not regulated?
So that's going to be different from state to state. So for my clients, and this is something I hand out freely. If you're in Michigan and you want it, it's not going to be relevant for you if you're not in Michigan, but I do a whole chart. So we use this. I just handed it out to 200 social workers the other day. I've done this presentation to other lawyers. It basically is not a flow chart, but a chart that goes through the different levels of care, the different licensing for different levels of care, and what programs work with the different living settings or the different care settings. And so anybody comes in new to our office and they have some kind of long-term care need or concern, that's one of the first things I do is we go to and we say, okay, well, the first thing we want to know, at least in Michigan, this may be not so much true in other states, but we want to know, okay, if we know what level of care, then we know what options and what we can do here. And so we really want to define that, because my daughter is about to go into college. And so she doesn't really like it that I still tease her about this. But when she was about 8, she would talk about going to the nursing home, and they were going to have a troupe that was singing to the nursing home residents. And I said, oh, really? What nursing home? And it was just like adult apartments. It wasn't. And even though she was 8, that's what most people kind of think of. They think of everything as a nursing home. Everything is one big category. Well, I think it really is important to, if there is distinctions, certainly independent living is very different than assisted living.
Yeah.
Assisted living, at least in Michigan, is very different than skilled nursing. And so understanding some of those key distinctions is really important as far as what your rights rights are, what services you might be able to expect, and what government benefits might be available to you.
So how would a family member know, though, is this a regulated facility or not? Is there a way to look that up?
They should be able to ask.
Okay.
But sometimes the answers are a bit confusing. So yes, there should be a way. In Michigan, for example, you would go to the licensing. So I have a website that I give everybody that you'll be able to look at, and it's on that chart that I have. I would imagine this is true in every state. Not only does it tell you if they're licensed or not and what their license covers, if it's skilled, it'll tell you how many beds they have and how many beds are dual eligible for Medicare and Medicaid, how many are not dual eligible, how many are private pay only. Like there's a whole lot of information usually on that website, at least in Michigan. You can also see the inspection reports and if there's been any negative action against that facility.
Is that a specific site in Michigan, or is there a national site to look for inspection reports?
So I know of the national site, and I don't really go to that one as often, but the Michigan site is just the licensing site. So I would imagine in most states, you could go to the state licensing site and search based on the license type that you're looking for. The national one is the Medicare.gov. There is a Medicare.gov that does rankings and they do grades or whatever of the different facilities that accept Medicare. I don't go to that because some of the reviews that I've seen on that or the star ratings that I've seen on that aren't consistent with our knowledge of the facility. Some of the ones that we think are the best don't always have the 5 stars. And some of the ones that I'd say, well, I would never send my mom there, have 5 stars. And it's about how well you comply, how well you teach to the test, basically, what teachers say. Can you teach to the test and teach to getting that 5 star? And so some places that aren't that great still have a 5 star on the Medicare.gov.
What would a family member search in Google to find maybe the licensing site in their state to look at the better reports?
So, and I often forget what the name, in fact, they keep changing the name of the licensing bureau in Michigan. So I often will Google Bureau of Licensing or Michigan Bureau of Licensing, or because they change, every new governor, they change the name for some reason. And you want to make sure it's a state website. It's not a private website. I mean, I'm sure there's really good information on private websites too, but if you're looking specifically for this, then you're going to want to make sure it's the state website, and you just kind of have to search into there until you get to the license. And it's going to have other licenses too. It's going to be licenses for contractors. It's going to be licenses for hospitals. It's going to be licenses for any kind of state licensing. Then you just have to choose the menu item of either nursing home or whatever the license is called in your state.
Okay. And then one last thing about the regulated, non-regulated. Would you say that a family member should consider when they're looking at placement, whether or not that facility is regulated should be something they're considering?
So it should be a consideration, but sometimes it's not the answer. We really want to look at least in my area, we want to look at what are the needs of the person and what is the quality of life that we can get in different settings. Typically, in Michigan at least, we're going to have a fairly small room in a regulated facility. Whereas if we go into some assisted livings or certainly independent livings, we might have a 2-bedroom apartment with a kitchen and all this. And so it really depends on what are the needs of the person and what, if they need 24-hour care, if they really need that supervision, yes, I'd probably go towards the more regulated, the more licensed facilities. If they still, have the need for some independence, some, sort of quality of life issues, I don't mind the unlicensed facilities, at least here, because there is no license in Michigan for assisted living. So we're often looking at that and saying, okay, but this is a better quality of life for them because they can still have their kitchenette. They can still close the door and watch their own TV. There's different levels of care needs based on what the individual's needs are.
And downside is the wrong word, but would you say the downside to maybe a not regulated facility is that maybe you don't have all those other regulations that another facility does? So if the facility says it's time for discharge, you don't have a lot of say. Is that the main kind of consequence of a non-regulated? Okay.
So I'll call them up. And so we've made a real effort to make sure we have a good relationship within the long-term care community here throughout the home care, assisted living, independent living, all of that. So sometimes I will make a call and say, hey, is there some accommodations we can do? I did a podcast a little bit ago with somebody that was talking about doing some training for assisted living homes. And our point was, was, if we could just accommodate this person's need that you want to kick out, yes, they have behaviors, but with a little, quite a few tweaks, if we make sure that they have the movies they like, or we have the snacks that they like, or there's something that can stop that triggering, whatever that trigger is that has caused them to have those behaviors, don't you want to keep that resident that's paying you every month? All the places have all these marketing people, and they're trying to sell their rooms. And so if we can just do a little tweak to keep them there. So we try to advocate, but yeah, they have, at least in Michigan, they have the right to have them leave with proper notice.
I love this. Thank you so much for sharing so freely. So super helpful. I'm going to link to all of these resources below, and I'll also link how people can find you. But can you share what's the best way for people, if they are in Michigan, what's the best way for them to find you, get a hold of you?
Sure. So we have, our phone number is 800-990-6030. And then we've got our website, which is mannorlawgroup.com. Mannor's spelled a little different. It's Mannor, 2 N's and an O, but mannorlawgroup.com. And it has a lot of resources on there, and our blog and our podcast and all of that.
Yeah. And that's the other thing I want to bring up. So you have an amazing podcast. That's how we initially met, Advice from Your Advocates. So even if you're not in Michigan, but you want to gain more understanding and information about what your rights are as a family member and important legal matters, I would highly recommend going to wherever you get your podcasts and looking up Advice from Your Advocates. So
I appreciate that. It's really fun to do the podcast.
Yeah, it's fun for sure. And it's super helpful. And it's just a nice, easy, free way for people to access information they might not otherwise be able to get. So I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much. This was great. We're going to have to bring you back on though, because I have so many questions I'm withholding.
That would be great. Thank you, Nana.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob.
Also, Nico gets a belly rub for every person who subscribes from this video. So if you haven't already, click the red subscribe button. It's totally free. And Nico says, thank you very much.